All right, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks. This has obviously been one of the more active, maybe the most active team this entire early part of this free agency cycle. And we're starting to see some details trickle out about the reasons behind some of the Seahawks moves. And when you listen to former players and a lot of the things that are kind of leaking out into the media right now, it looks like Seattle's decisions are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. In some cases, they were tough, they were brutal, but they were right. They were the right move to make, undeniably so. And we got some great updates on that. But first, I'm Nick. That's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, two of the biggest moves the Seahawks have made so far this offseason involves the release of longtime wide receiver Tyler Lockett and, of course, trading DK Metcalf to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Metcalf has come out recently. He's had some interesting comments describing the rationale and decision making, how disappointed he was with how the Seahawks approached Tyler Lockett. We'll get into Metcalf's comments, and then we'll talk about on the other side why this is a really good decision by Seattle moving off of Tyler Lockett. So, first, let's pull up this report from the Seattle Times here, talking about specifically the Metcalf and Tyler Lockett deal. Metcalf did mention there was substantial change in his time with the Seahawks, notably with Mike Macdonald taking over for Pete Carroll as coach a year ago. Metcalf noted that by the beginning of last season, there were only five other players who were still with the team who were there when he arrived in 2019: Smith, Dixon, Lockett, Reed, and Myers. Metcalf said it also hurt him to see the team phase out Lockett as the year wore on, which led to Lockett's release 2 weeks ago on the same day Metcalf's trade request was revealed. That's my brother, Metcalf said, and it's like I had to sit and watch my brother be told, "You're not good enough anymore." That was basically the hard part for me. Now, it's important to understand that the Seattle Seahawks, when they made these decisions, they didn't make them out of spite. They didn't sit there and say, "Oh, we hate Tyler Lockett now," or "We hate DK Metcalf here." They actually made these decisions. And this is what happens with players. They get emotionally invested in the way things used to be, right? DK Metcalf mentioned in these comments himself, things were different than where they were 2019. Of course, they're different. It's 2025. This team needs to go back to making deep playoff runs. Things need to change. And unfortunately, good players degrade over time. And if you look at the data with Tyler Lockett, and that's what we're going to go into next here. Let's pull up actually this chart and get us going here. Is this first one I think is Tyler Lockett's catch percentage. And if you look at 3-year bundles, 19 to 21, and now look at 22 to 24, you'll notice a decline, a noticeable decline. Let's go ahead and go to the next graphic here. This is Tyler Lockett's receptions per game. Again, it's not just centered around last season. We're taking 3-year averages here. 19 to 21, 22 to 24, receptions per game, decline. And then you go to the final thing, yards per target, 19 through 21, 22 through 24 on the right here. Once again, noticeable and clear decline. The Seattle Seahawks decision to move off of Tyler Lockett was 100% the right one based on a declining veteran that was now costing more than the value he was providing. It's tough. These kind of brutal decisions hurt people sometimes, but it's the right move to make. And this also leads into why the DK Metcalf trade was also the right move to make. When you have a player, DK Metcalf's a really talented guy, he's a good player, nothing against him. But when you have a player going to a final year of his deal and he's focused on 2019, he's focused on 2020, you've got a problem. There is nothing worse than a player who's living in the past, especially if he's a star player, especially if he's a vocal player. You need to move off of people like that. That's important in any organization. If you got a guy on your team, whether it's a business, a football team, or whatever, if you have a guy that's living 100% in the past and he's not seeing the realities in front of him, he's emotionally invested in Tyler Lockett. I get it. They're friends, they're teammates. They've been that way for a long time. But Lockett is obviously not the player he once was. He wasn't worth the cap dollars. And DK Metcalf, I guarantee you his comments on this podcast, this was lurking behind the scenes. This is why the Seahawks traded him instead of giving him a lot of money. He wasn't the right fit for the new direction of this team. Again, two tough, brutal moves, especially when you pair in the Geno Smith trade, but it was the right decision-making process and the right moves to make by Mike Macdonald and John Schneider. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but first, Seahawks fans, in the comment section below, now that you've started to see more comments or starting to see more information leak, how do you think the Seattle Seahawks have done in terms of their leadership handling this offseason, releasing Lockett, trading Smith, trading Metcalf? Do you still give it an A plus in terms of performance, or do you think maybe now some of these players had a point? Maybe you don't feel as good about those trades. Maybe you think it's a C. Whatever it is, grade what the Seahawks have done so far this offseason. Now that you've had a few days to digest everything and go through what these players are saying, put that in the comment section below, along with any other thoughts you have involving Metcalf or Lockett here. Really curious what you guys have to say. But Mize, over to you. What are your thoughts specifically about this entire Seattle Seahawks situation?
Yeah, I think when you take a look at what the Seahawks did, specifically when we're talking about Tyler Lockett here, I think it made sense. I think at this point in time, when you start to see a guy in Tyler Lockett's position, when you're getting on the wrong side of 30, especially when we're talking about the NFL, it makes sense. You start to see the play decline. He had a really great game at the beginning of this season, and then from there, you can see his PFF grades throughout last season slowly decline. Went from like he had a 90 game to in the 70s to the 60s to the 50s, and even some games in the 40s by the end of the season. Really, just the play just went downhill. And I don't think that's indicative of Tyler Lockett's not skillful. I think it shows what age does to a player, where at the beginning of the season, when you're fresh, when you're healthy, you can go out and you can still, you're good once as you ever were. But then as the injuries wear, all the things from the season start to add up, you see the decline, and that's the difference. That's why when players start to age, that's the hard part. It's not being, good for one game, giving it your all. It's being able to replicate that over a season, over a career, over multiple seasons, as your graph shows that this is a player who's starting to decline, who's starting to go downhill. And you see that, you start to see the evidence stack up. Hey, this is a guy, he's not going to be at his best at the end of the season. That's not a player that we can bank on. When, at the beginning of the season, that's fine, but that doesn't win championships. You got to be at your best at the end of the season. That's the guys you need. That's who you need to be able to rely on. So I think it was a really smart move by Mike McDonald and co. I know it's not favorable. It always kind of stings when you get rid of these guys, especially like a Tyler Lockett, who's been around for so long. It's tough. It really hurts to see someone, probably one of your favorite players, come out and just be that guy like for so long, and then you get rid of him. It hurts. But when you look at the numbers, it makes sense. It's no longer beneficial to do that. It is no longer beneficial for him to be, a guy on this team, especially with the rise of Jackson Smith and Jigba, the new retooling of this team, kicking and Jigba out wide, which people complain. They say, oh, he's just a slot guy. He's a slot guy. He played like over 100 snaps out wide last season, and he did really good whenever he was out wide. So I don't understand why people keep nagging on that. Like, yes, last year he played a lot in the slot, but he's very capable of playing outside. He's just a really, really solid receiver overall. So I really think the rise of Njigba is good. I think the additions of guys like Cooper Kupp in the slot, he's going to be a good addition. And Marquez Valdez Scantling is another guy that I like on the opposite side of Njigba. I think these are both really solid additions by this team. So overall, I think the Seahawks, they have a good plan. You got to kind of cut through the noise, cut through the emotion, and look at the numbers. You'll see what they're doing. And I think this was just really good front office work by the Seattle Seahawks.
Well, especially when they were considering, to extending DK Metcalf, getting him a big deal. If you've got a star player and he's not on board of the direction you're trying to go as a team, you get rid of him. You don't let your players run the organization. That's one of the things the Eagles do great. The Ravens do this well. The Patriots did this well with Bill Belichick. The Chiefs do it well. They don't let the players run the organization. They let the franchise, the organization, the culture lead the team forward. And that organization is led, of course, by your GM and head coach, and that's Mike McDonald, John Schneider, obviously. And when you have a player of DK Metcalf's stature, and he's very clearly, very publicly, if he's saying this on podcasts, I guarantee you he was saying this behind the scenes and in the locker room in front of the coaches saying, what is wrong with what we're doing? We used to be different. We used to have things figured out. And the fact that he's seemingly against this change in culture, you got to get rid of him. And there is some concern. We see this from a lot of Seahawks fans, or at least some of them. And Metcalf mentioned this. He blamed it on the new coaching staff and Ryan Grubb, especially talking about they're misusing Tyler Lockett. They just don't know how to use these players. Let's pull up our final graph here. We pulled up a lot of graphs today, just some interesting data points. And this is the receiving grade and drop grade of Tyler Lockett going back to 2019. And in 2019, he was pretty good. Dip in 2020. It was 2020. We all remember that year, of course. A lot of things dipped. 2021, it was good. And then what do you notice? A decline in 22, a decline in 23, and further decline in 2024, right? No matter where you look at it, whether it's raw data like at the beginning of the show or the sort of graph trend of PFF grades, advanced analytics here, it's clear Tyler Lockett's in decline. This isn't a Ryan Grubb incompetence thing. This isn't a Mike McDonald incompetence thing. This is a player getting older. And this is the fact that you've got guys like DK Metcalf that weren't buying into the new system. It's very possible, actually, now that we have this information, that maybe even Geno Smith was a little resistant. I'm not saying he was. There are no reports that he was, but I think it's possible now that we're seeing more and more reports like this. And this is what you have to do if you're trying to reshape the organization and reshape the culture. Anyone who's not bought in the direction you're going, get them out, right? No matter if it's a tough trade, no matter if it's a fan favorite, these are the moves you have to make if you want to win titles. Because there's also a hard truth about the Seattle Seahawks. They're one of the better franchises and have been for a long time in the 21st century. But if you go back to their last Super Bowl appearance since the 2014 season, they've won 3 playoff games total, right? When you look at teams that have struggled in the postseason, the Dallas Cowboys are the permanent, like forever example of that. The Cowboys have the same amount of playoff wins as the Seattle Seahawks during that time period. So again, that's who the Seattle Seahawks have become. They've become the Dallas Cowboys. Mike McDonald, John Schneider don't want that to happen. They don't want to be stuck in this land of winning 8, 9, 10 games, maybe a wild card round, and then that's it for 15, 20, 30 years. They're making the moves they need to make to force them out of it. It will probably be a multi-year process, but they're making the tough decisions. Tough decisions are often the winning ones. I love what Seattle's making here. Again, now that we're seeing the reports, now that we can take a deeper look at the data, it's clear the Seattle Seahawks are making the right moves.